Welcome to the Monos Pod with Tino and Matt. What's up, Matt? And what's up with the Oklahoma hat?
It's going well. I'm looking forward to the year. Oklahoma softball, man. One of the best college teams ever across the board in sports.
It's true. I thought it was for Brian Bosworth, but I don't know. Maybe I was wrong. Today on
Billy Sims.
That's right, Billy Sims was the man. You and Brandon all about Billy Sims. Uh so on today's pod, we are going to talk starting pitching, dynasty starting pitching prospects. Always a crapshoot, a bit of a lottery, but if you can hit, can really change the complexion of your team. We'll do our top 10 today. I think next week we'll try to come back with 11 through 20. There are so many pitching prospects. And, from my perspective, once I got to about, I'd say six, I could have replaced any 6 through 10 with any of the next 15 to 20, to be honest with you, or at least make a case for them. So with that, let me ask you first, are you impressed with this group of starting pitching prospects? Are you excited about them? Is it a group that you're less likely to roster or value because you don't see that type of upside talent that we typically do? Or is it the other way around?
Um, yeah, so it definitely doesn't have the top of the board upside. Like, you don't have a G-Rod and a Perez at the top of the board like last year. But this is extremely deep. There's guys that you could hit on
Mm-hmm.
even past the 20s. So I think it's stronger than last year as far as its depth goes, much stronger, but doesn't necessarily have the top of the board standouts. I have one that I think is in a tier on his own. But and then the other thing too, I think a lot of it has to do with what type of league you're in. So, these are all guys you want to roster in a full dynasty league. In our mothership league, where it's 15 keepers, 15 redraft, I'm not sure how many from this year lists you want to keep, right? So if you're contending, it's not necessarily the best idea, even with a guy that I have number one, because he's probably eighth on the depth chart. Um, but if you're investing, these are guys, there's tons of people that someone could invest in here. And then there's guys that are just your guys, right? So one of my guys on the list is obviously one of your guys. And no matter whether you're contending or not, that you've invested in him for so long, you just people are going to see that person out. So yeah, so it's an interesting board, and I think this is probably next to outfield, probably the deepest
Mm-hmm.
out of all the positions.
I'm not bowled over by any of the pitchers on this list. There are a couple that, obviously I've rostered Harrison now for 2 years, and he's kind of become my guy, but I don't know that I will stump for him any differently than some of the others. But what's funny is, or interesting to me is, I always think there are going to be dominant pitchers out of every class, right? And it's up to me or up to us to identify which ones are going to be dominant. There's never a period in time where there are no dominant young pitchers, right? It's
Yeah.
a part of the baseball cycle. So it could be Brock Porter, or it could be Thomas White, or it could be, Robbie Snelling for all we know.
Mhm.
But it's going to be someone, and it's up to us to figure out who that is, regardless of whether we think the the elite upside is there. It's kind of always there. Um, it's just a matter of us figuring that out.
Yeah.
Uh,
And that's what's so fun about pitching, right? Because with hitters, there's a lot of skills that aren't all of a sudden an aha moment.
right.
But if one of these pitchers finds a third pitch
Yep.
or a fourth pitch, or they adjust on their secondaries and they're just all of a sudden elite, these
Sure.
players could jump from not being on a top 100 to being the top, starting pitching prospect in the league.
Right. Well, think about this. Like, I think I go back to the Mariners because I spend so much time with them with the Mariners cast, and I'm a fan. But what happened to Brian Wu and Bryce Miller, well, and George Kirby for that matter, when they started throwing a sinker or a two seamer, right? For Wu, it was a sinker. For Miller and Kirby, it's more of a two seamer. But the whole approach to their fastball, which all three of them have elite four seam fastballs, the whole approach to their fastball changes as a hitter when that ball can potentially jam you as a right-handed hitter, right? Completely different pitcher to try to hit because they changed the grip on their fastball, basically. And this, you could say the same thing about Skeens. Skeens is my number one. Paul Skeens, number one pick last season, Pittsburgh Pirates, right-handed starter. And so I'll start with that. I look at Skeens and he's got a elite velocity on the four seamer, right? He's up to close to 100 miles an hour. He'll probably sit 96 to 98. Big dude, 6'6". Skeens will certainly be be a horse for the Pirates. And he's got his slider is the 180 grade pitch that I have on this list, right? I don't have another 80 grade pitch in my top 10, but Skeens has an 80 grade slider. And in my opinion, but he doesn't have really much else besides that top end velocity in the 80 grade slider. He has some semblance of a changeup, but it's not a pitch that he's really thrown in the pros. And for me, it's if he doesn't develop that changeup, my first question is, how does he get lefties out, right? Is he going to get lefties out with fastball slider in the way that, say, Strider can or Hunter Green, we hope can at some point? I don't see him developing into the Paul Skeens that we want to see until he comes up with his next pitch. But his next pitch could simply be a 95 mile an hour two seam fastball, right? So you don't know if that fastball is going to be straight like the four seam or if it's going to dip in and jam you as a right-handed hitter. And so I don't know. For me, you're right. It's a simple tweak to someone's repertoire can take them from like 6-1, right? Kyle Harrison. What if Kyle Harrison's changeup is a real like plus pitch this season? Now you go from a fastball and a slurve to fastball, slurve, changeup, or if he adds a hard slider at like 89 miles an hour to couple with the slurve, the changeup, and the 95 mile an hour fastball. You're right. The littlest tweak can change the prospects of any one of the pitchers we're going to talk about. Whereas hitting, it's more of a process, right? The change that typically hitters can make is there's more loft, or they're trying to get out in front of the ball, or they decide to take that loft away and become a line drive hitter. But that's something you have to adjust over the course of an entire offseason, right? It's not just let me change the grip on this pitch and go. So yeah, I agree. We could see any number of these guys just take off or fall off because they lost 2 miles an hour, right? Skeens loses 2 miles an hour on his fastball and he sits 94 to 96 and it's a dead zone fastball. He's toast, right? He's more of like a number 3, number 4 at that point. So I don't know. Interesting stuff. So we should start with Skeens, as I said. I did pros and cons for my first couple of pitchers. With Skeens, pro is proximity. It's that the slider is the only 80 grade pitch on this list. He's got overwhelming stuff. His home park is slightly favors pitchers, and he's got. I think it's cool, and I think it's can help that he has a bunch of young players kind of coming up with him, right? I think there'll be a little less pressure on Skeens once Bubba Chandler, Jared Jones, O'Neal Cruz, Termar Johnson, all these guys are kind of developing together. And so it's not going to be solely focused on Skeens. But the fastball shape is bad. And the velo jump came as a senior at LSU when he transferred from Air Force. And you wonder, when they have that big velocity jump, is there a potential injury when the velocity jumps that much, right? And then the other big thing is, as I said earlier, there is no third pitch. And so until he develops a true third pitch, he's going to be death on righties. I think we already know that. But what is he going to do to combat lefties? Is Skeens your number one?
He's number 4 on mine.
Ah, nice. So what is it? What is it with Skeens that you don't like?
It's not so much that I don't like. I just like the 3 I have above him. 2 of them are injured, but what I like about Skeens, he's gonna come up at a decent rate, right? I like college arms like this. Then you don't have the high risk of a high school arm coming in and having to develop him. I have his command quite high for his arsenal, right? So I have him at 660 command. I don't think there's anything off there. I know I have been reading some stuff that he does tinker with a two seamer, so that will help, and he is tinkering with a change as well.
Yeah.
So so he has that repertoire. For me, it's just I haven't, I think we could count on seeing him in competitive situations based upon the college performance,
Mm-hmm.
but I just want to see more of him.
Mm-hmm.
And it says a lot that he was, it wasn't like Langford and Cruz were like some low tier
Yes,
hitters.
right.
These are also future MVPs. So the very fact that a decent GM at Pittsburgh is going to take him number one says a lot. So
Right.
it's not a knock on him. I just like the other three just a little bit more. He's in that same tier. I have four players in the same tier.
Mm-hmm. So why is Max Meyer your number one?
I
Just
have
kidding.
Jackson Jobe as my number one pitcher. Um, what I did last year, I did exercise last year of K minus walks and looking at that in pros and minors, and it seemed to work last year, so I did the same thing this year. Um, and I think that's kind of what separates the four in this tier for me. But obviously, Job is ultra elite here. I do have his command in 75/80, so he does have one of the highest grades there. The dude only walked six batters last year. His strike percentage was 63%, the time throwing strikes, and it's not like he throws straight balls either, right? So he has elite slider. I gave it 75 grade, with RPMs that are better than most in the majors,
Right.
right?
Over
And
3,000.
yes, and so and his fastball velo 95 to 97, he could locate it. You need that to counter with a slider there. And he hits all parts of the zone as well with his
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So for me, he is that command pitcher. And even if we look at just the stats, so his K minus walk is 32%. The leader last year in limited time was DeGrom at 34%. But even if you just go K minus walk with pitchers in MLB, it sets apart the best ones, right? So DeGrom, Cole, Scherzer, Strider, Sale, Glasnow, Haney, which is interesting, Burns, Gausman, Nola, right? These are all the top players with K minus walk. So his walk percentage was 2%. He can get hit hard, so his home run percentage was between 1 and 2. So that's not elite, but that's the type of pitcher he is. And the third thing here is the pitcher's park. I just like the fact that he's gonna settle in Detroit. That's the park you want to pitch from. He's gonna play most games against the AL Central. That's a +2. He's not going to be an AL East player. Pitching against those lineups or pitching against Baltimore a lot of times. So yeah. So I see him just a little above the other three I have here. Skeens is one of the other three
Mm-hmm.
um, there as well.
Job is my number two. I agree with most everything you said. I think compared to Skeens as an example, the fastball shape is actually really beautiful with Job. Like he's able to really spot it at the top of the zone. It's not an easy pitch to square up. The pitch I love the most, even though he has got that huge slider, I love the changeup, and I love the fact that he has a plus changeup already that he can throw to left-handed hitters. Right, there's not that concern about the big platoon splits because of the presence of the change, and I know he's working on a cutter as well. So you're talking about like a real four pitch type of starter, which in that park, as you said, last year in Detroit, the overall park factor for a hitter was 99. So it was 1% more difficult for a hitter to hit in Comerica than your average Major League Park. But the home run park factor was 90. So 10% more difficult to hit a home run. And I think that, as you said, will play up for Job. The reason why I don't have him at 1, I like him overall, like the overall package of Jackson Job and how he projects as a starting pitcher fantasy wise. I like it better than Skeens, right? I like the fact that he has multiple pitches. I like the fastball shape. I love the fact that he's got a pitch to throw to lefties. But two things. One, the pitching development in Detroit has been so bad for so long. And I know it's a different regime now, but until I see a great young pitcher developed by Detroit, I don't really know. I don't really know. I'm not gonna embrace Detroit pitchers fully, right? The other big thing for me is he had a back issue last year. It was lumbar spine inflammation. And as a 21-year-old I lived in Detroit and it's cold, right? It can be really, really cold in the fall and it can be really, really cold in the early spring. And so if he's got a back issue in Detroit, that's scary to me. And he's 6'2", 190. And so if you're a smaller pitcher with a back issue and you've had some injuries and you're pitching in the cold for a team that doesn't always develop pitching well, I think there are enough red flags there for me to not put him at 1. I think it sounds silly to say, I like his upside a little more than Skeens because of the total package. But I think if I had to choose between the two, I would take Skeens because of the size and because it's not Detroit. Who do you have at 3? I guess 2. Sorry, 2.
2. I have somebody who's not going to play in 2024. So I have Andrew Painter at 2. He's in the middle of rehabbing from Tommy John surgery. There's no reason for Philadelphia to necessarily rush him back. I don't mind pitchers who get TJS young. I think it will bring stability later, get it over with. I think the bad part is I think he waited, right? And I think Philadelphia made a mistake instead of just doing it right away. He did get hurt last year, but just going off what he did last year all the way up through AA, his K minus walk over 30%, elite K percentage over 30%, walk percentage 5%. Doesn't give up a lot of home runs. Produces tons of weak contact. He could get over 100 on his velo, and hopefully that's recovered after the Tommy John surgery. And he just has a number of pitches that move a lot. And his IVP is elite. Along with going along with Job is the command, which once he got into high A and AA was elite as well. So the only question mark here is when's he going to come back, and is he going to recover what he once had? Why I liked him so much last year, I think by the time we did the pod last year, he got hurt. So I didn't see him on my list last year. I think at least my top 10 just because of that. But the other thing why it was so shocking that he got hurt is if you watch him, he's just so effortless in his delivery. It's like, it didn't seem like his elbow was getting, compared to some other deliveries of even some other, players I have in here.
Right.
It's just effortless. So that was shocking. But if he could recover that and have the command and the velo, the MPH with the spin, I could see him at the top of this list next year.
I it's you can't debate what Painter did up until he got hurt, right?
Mhm,
And so he was. I just brought my list up from last year. He was my number one,
mhm,
and he, but he'll be 21 on April 10th. He's going to take all this year to rehab, right? He'll be 22 going in basically next season. He's going to take probably the first half of the 25 season to act, which sounds weird to say, to get up and going, right? And so what we really won't see, so assuming his stuff comes back, which is not necessarily a safe assumption, we won't see true Andrew Painter until 2026, right? Because you've got the year off this year, you've got the year to get your feet back underneath you in 25. Chances are he'll spend some of that time in the minor leagues and then be up in the majors at the end of 25. 26, you would hope that he's ramped up and ready to go, right? So the question mark as to whether the stuff comes back is one question. But for me, when I look at this list, I think, for pitchers specifically, hitters less so, it's about a lot of it is proximity and health because
mhm,
you never know when the pitcher is going to go down. And I think it's interesting when I look at my list of my top 10, they're a lot older than the other lists, right? I've got Lazaro Montes on, my first base list, and you've got, Josue De Paula on the outfield list, and you've got 18-year-olds. On the pitcher list, it's really hard because health is such a huge deal. And so for me, I don't have Painter. I have him just outside of the top 10. And I think from a talent standpoint, from an upside standpoint, he's right up there with, he's at the very top, right? With maybe you might say a Noah Schultz might be up there with him. You might say, I don't know. I don't know if there's another guy with that kind of upside there, but I can't put him there because I'm not going to see true Andrew Painter until 2026. And so if someone were to deal him to me in a dynasty at really, really cheap, then that would be great. But as far as putting him in my top 10, I can't. Who's your, I guess, number three?
Who's your two? Oh, your two is
Joe.
Joe.
Who's Joe?
Yeah. So this one is the same thing when it comes to health, right?
Mm-hmm.
My counter with that is I'm looking for that elite arm, right? Because I think a lot of starters, if we're not playing Dynasty and we're playing keepers, can be got for just like a decent hitter can be got for a middle investment level of value. So I'm looking for the elite of elite here. So I think you guess who it is coming from good organization. Who the hell knows whether he's healthy or not because they never report on him. But I'm still in on him. So I have Daniel Espino at 3.
Ooh,
Six
nice. That's out of
6'2",
left field.
225. Um, off injured, but again, how can you? It is tough to deny. He's got an 80 grade fastball. I think.
Has or had?
What's that?
Has or had? I think that's the
Yeah,
that's the real
exactly. Yeah,
question,
well,
right?
let's see him, right?
Yeah,
But you talk about so Skeens has upper 90s, but the shape is not there. But you talk about elite shape of a fastball that's got run on it. His four seam is the best, even if you compare it to majors when it's working, right? And when he's healthy is the big if. But I'm willing to roll the dice here. So his K minus walk, again, this is another one over 30. His K percentage for over 40% consistently. His walk percentage is higher than other players, 10%. So he does have issues with control. Now the issue here is he going to ultimately be in the bullpen once Cleveland reveals what his health is, right?
right.
That's the other thing that's frustrating because Cleveland has we kind of knew something was wrong last year, but Cleveland didn't say anything until late.
Until I had him on my team.
Yeah, Yeah, but with stuff here, I'm willing to take the risk. His stuff is he doesn't have the command of Painter, but his if you have a player with an elite fastball like this, you don't have to worry about developing the other stuff. And his slider is graded between 60 and 70 by most scouts as well. So as far as stuff, I think he has the best stuff of anybody on this list. Health wise, he has the worst health of anybody on this list. So I would understand if somebody doesn't have him on the list, but if I'm just going off potential and looking for that elite starter, that elite pitcher, Espino is still it for me.
Sure. I agree 100%. I think that of all the pitchers on this list, including Skeens, including Painter, Espino is probably my favorite and has the highest upside of anybody. The fastball is an 80 grade fastball, right? Hands down. I think the slider is 70, but he's got a curveball, he's got a changeup. It was really sad when he got hurt for me because one, I was invested in him, but two, I really enjoyed watching him pitch. And I think a healthy Espino is at the top of this list for me. It's like Painter. We don't know what we're getting from him. And so if the investment is low to acquire Espino, then absolutely, like I would invest in him all over the place. But it truly is a lottery ticket at this point in time. He's 23, right? We don't really know what's going on. So I don't know. I don't have him in my top 10. I couple him with Painter. It's those super high upside guys. We talk all the time about philosophically, who are you going after when you're looking at minor league players? Is it the Jordan Westberg types, right? Who don't have the upside, but play a role on your team? Or are you looking to be elite at every position? And if you're looking to be elite, Espino and Painter are worth that investment. It's just really hard with injured pitchers. I did not, like I said, I had him just outside, same as Painter, but it's kind of their own bucket of injured dudes that I'm interested in. And if you really put my feet to the fire, would I rather have Jacob Mizorowski or Daniel Espino, right? I'd probably say Espino if I really had to answer that question. Number 3 for me is the same as my number 3 last year. I brought my list up from last year. We can go over that real quickly at the end. Is Kyle Harrison. Kyle Harrison is, obviously those that I play with in leagues know, one of my favorite young pitchers, 22 years old, left-handed starting pitcher, 3rd round pick of the Giants a couple years ago. He will be in the rotation this season for the Giants. High strikeout pitcher, 22 years old. Like I said, left-handed, low 3/4 arm slot, plus fastball, great shape, probably his best strikeout pitch, has a slurve that's a little too slow for me. Another pitcher who I wish had a little bit more MPH on a slider, like a high 80s slider as well. And has a changeup that has flashed plus. I have a 55 grade on the changeup and on the slider, and a 65 on the fastball currently. He's also toyed with the cutter a bit, and I think that could help him as well. But his control is 45, maybe 50 if you're being generous. And that's been the issue for him at times. I will push back with you a little bit on using K-BB as a way to measure minor league pitchers, because I think that each level, and Harrison's the example here for me, each level is different, right? AA Southern League used a tacked ball last year. So a ball that was stickier to the hand than a normal baseball. That can change your spin, that can change your ability to obviously to grip the baseball, can change your command. And then you go to AAA where Harrison was, and on the weekdays, it's an automated balls and strike system, right? And on the weekends, it's an umpire, but you can challenge an umpire's call. And so he was in a situation where his walk rate was sky high, but a lot of folks think it was sky high because he was in AAA Pacific, or the Pacific Coast League, and not with regular umpires. So that's not to say that his command or control is great. It's only to say that when I look at the K minus BB in that type of, I think it's situational dependent, right?
Mhm.
If you take the number and you're not thinking about situation, I don't know how much of a tool it is, but if you're thinking about, if you are thinking about those things, it can certainly help, because Harrison came up and there were times where he battled his command and control, but the reality is he was striking a lot of dudes out when he came up. He had some really dynamite performances, and that wouldn't have shown up necessarily in AAA Sacramento. But he's my number three. I expect from him moving forward probably 150 to 170 innings type guy. I don't think he's a 200 inning pitcher. He does tend to throw a lot of pitches because of the command and control issues, but he could be 160 innings and 200 strikeouts, right? I think
Mhm.
he goes about it differently, but I think the Blake Snell sort of stat line is something that you can not expect from Harrison, but I think he can reach.
Mhm.
Did you have him in your top 10?
Yes, I did.
Where'd you have him?
I was just giving you a bad time. I have him with I have the three lefties together
Uh-huh.
at 7, 8, and 9. So he's in that range here.
Got it.
Um now I have a couple of questions for you. Just I think it's helpful to think about this. I'm kind of down on San Francisco overall,
Mm-hmm.
um, especially since doing this prospecting, together for 3 years. They've had these hitters come up that have not reached their potential yet. Luciano, Matos, so forth, and and the strength was seen not to be their hitting development, but their pitching development.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you have people behind Harrison who are coming up, Wisenhut and so forth, but their philosophy is so different than Seattle. So and it's something you mentioned in Pacific Coast League. So it seems like Seattle just says fuck it, we don't want anybody to go to Pacific Coast League, right? So they just skip it, right? And that's why Wu and Miller were surprises last year, because nobody really knew they were going to be coming up, right? As far as that goes. So, and they let them go. They let them pitch too. They let them go longer distances in Double A, get them ready in Double A for the majors. Harrison was just kind of weird. So, even looking at his stints, in AAA, I know they were limiting his innings, but 4, 3.2, 3.2, 4 1/3, 5, 2 1/3, 3 2/3. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. That just seems weird to me. And then he gets up and I think he 5 innings, and then he had his best outing versus Cincinnati, right? That 2 hit shutout, 6 1/3 innings. What did he K over 10,
And I
right?
think, yeah.
Yeah, so to me, this development of just kind of the smaller pieces of San Francisco is just so different than a team that has succeeded with young pitchers like Seattle. So I'm just wondering if, with the new manager coming in, if they're going to rethink their philosophy in developing these pitchers, and do you think? So my question is, do you think the development has hurt Harrison in San Francisco, and what's going on with these short stints?
I think so. One, I think that there was so I would follow his game, obviously, like every start. I wouldn't watch it. Some of them I did, but I would watch his stat line, right? And one of the things I found was that the minute he got in real trouble, they would pull him. And so if he was walking a ton of guys or he didn't seem to have a command, they would pull the plug on the start. And I think they were conscious of the number of pitches he threw, right? And he also, battled, I forgot what the injury was, but there was a little bit of injury stuff going on last season as well. Once he got to the majors, you're right. It's interesting. So in the majors, he had 7 games started, 34 and 2/3 innings. So almost 5 innings a start, which was much higher than it was in the minors. I think they were conscious of the other thing is they knew they were going to bring him up last season, or that was the plan at least. And had he not gotten hurt, he probably would have been up a lot earlier than he was. I think they would have called him up in July if he wasn't hurt. But they knew he was going to throw late in the season. And so I think they were saving some of those innings and some of those pitches for the major league. So I don't love the developmental philosophy in San Francisco as much as I did. I think we haven't seen them truly develop the way that we thought they would. I think they get a lot of credit where maybe credit isn't due. But you have to ask the question too, how much was Gabe Kapler responsible or not responsible for that? And so I'm guessing he wasn't completely a part of, shaping the entire pitching developmental system. You have to think that's Farhan Zaidi that does that. And so Farhan Zaidi remains there. I don't think they'll develop any differently. The other part is they've had some success stories, right? Logan Webb has been really good. Mm-hmm. And if you watched Keaton Wynn pitch last season, he had some dynamite stuff at times. Tristan Beck too. So I think there's a lot of positives going on in that system. I think with Harrison, so much of all of the questions about Harrison are simply control and command, right? He's getting pulled early because he's walking too many. He's getting pulled early because he's not fine enough with his control. And in the majors, they wanted to let him work through it a little bit. So I don't know if, again, when you look at someone like Harrison or someone like Joe, I think you're looking at 160 innings and a lot of strikeouts. And with Joe, probably a really low whip. And with Harrison, I think a little higher whip, but maybe a little more strikeout potential. Whereas someone like Schemes, I think you're looking more at innings and maybe a little higher ERA at times, and a ton of strikeouts, but more of an accumulator type. At least that's what I see as of right now.
Mm-hmm.
So we are at what, number 4 for you? So you went Job, Painter, Espino. So who's your
Schemes?
Schemes at 4. So I guess I'll go 4. For me, it's Dylan Lesko, right-handed starting pitcher for the Padres in the Padres organization. 20 years old, had TJ about a year and a half ago. Was a prep phenom in Georgia. Was being mentioned as a potential number 1 pick overall, and then he got hurt his senior year. I love Lesko. I'm a sucker for, and it's a bad thing. I love a great changeup, right? I love a great changeup. It was the Gavin Stone pitfall up for me last year. And Lesko's best pitch is his changeup. It's nasty. I gave it a 70. But the thing with Lesko is he also has what I have as a 65 grade fastball that sits mid to high 90s that has really great shape. And so it's going to take some time, right? The positive is last season off of TJ, he had regained his velocity and he had pretty good command of his 3 pitches. I do want to see him add a slider, something hard with a little bit of spin. Right now, it's forcing big curveball and that dynamite changeup. I think he's going to have to add a 4th pitch to his repertoire. But obviously, this is high for him at 4. But I just think that the talent is elite, and I think he really does. You always say the it factor. I think he has it, right? He's got some swagger. And you watch the changeup on video, and it's a Mickey Mouse changeup. It really does almost look like it stops mid-flight before it gets to the hitter. I love him. He's my number 4.
Mm-hmm.
Is he on your list?
He's just outside my list, mainly because of age. But yeah. So again, I think once we get past Schemes, the list could go anywhere.
Sure. For sure.
Yeah. So
I think he's kind of.
I like him a lot. I tried to get him in FYPDs last year. And it is nice that he's over the Tommy John surgery too. So again, I think some people are overly cautious about TGS. In some ways, it's become normalized, and I would rather have a player just get that over with and then move on forward.
Right.
Yeah. So I have him there. The other thing, the Padres, don't trade your guys. Geez, they don't make any trades because they're their rotation coming up is going to be elite. So you got
Dynasty. Yeah.
Lesko, and then you got Snelling, you got Thorpe acquired by the Yankee in the trade for Soto.
Even
You got
Iriarte. You have Iriarte
yeah.
too, who's like a good back end of the rotation
Hmm.
starter. You Michael King still.
Hmm.
Randy Vasquez is, has a 3,000 RPM slider. Like there's a lot there. So the other thing with Lesko, you talk about age and development, but the Padres clearly are starting to think differently about prospect age and development. And I know Salas in some way is a one-off, but I don't think the Padres are afraid of pushing their prospects quickly. They talk about Jackson Merrill potentially playing some outfield this season. And so I imagine if Lesko really does show out this season, they're going to be really aggressive with him. I would not be surprised to see him pitch well this season and be in the rotation in 25. If he's dynamite this season in the minors, it wouldn't surprise me to see him come up at the end of the season if they're in contention. So from a age standpoint, sure, he's 20, but I think that you have to consider organization as well. Think about the Dodgers. If he was in the Dodgers organization, you probably not seen him till 26, right? But with the Padres, it looks different. Who's your next pitcher?
So my next two on the list are extreme. One is extremely high ceiling, extremely low floor, and the other one is the highest ceiling one. So I have Mizraski at where are we at? 5.
Mm-hmm.
Brewers 6'7", 190. You could argue his fastball is between a 70 and 80. What makes it interesting is his great extension. So he does, unlike a bigger picture pitcher like a Hunter Green, who doesn't necessarily have a great extension. You have somebody that is taller and takes advantage of that extension. So his fastball is right on top of players. He comes in a 3/4 slot, very deceptive. We saw him in the Futures game here in Seattle. Nasty, so nasty in his delivery. You wonder when he's going to get hurt. So that's that's the low floor thing,
That's
and
the
you
wild.
wonder if he can control it, right? So he's the wild thing. But so he's one of those players like a Edward Cabrera, if he could control his stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
We still haven't seen that with Cabrera, but his walk rate is 11 to 15% in the minors. He could get his K rate up in some stints to 45, which is elite of elite. He's tough to hit too. He doesn't because of his elite fastball, he creates a lot of weak contact. He does have that slider to go along with the fastball, and a decent curve as well. His change needs work, and his control is the worst on the board here, right at 40, and that's 40 great, and that's kind.
Right.
um,
Mine's 30, I have 35 for him.
yeah, 35. Yeah. So again, he's one of these. I think the other ones are dice rolls, like the painter, the Espinos are dice rolls based on health. He's a dice roll based on skill. But if you do hits the jackpot there, it definitely is a jackpot.
Right.
Um, his ceiling is so low. So some say reliever, but if he doesn't get his control under control, how long is he going to last in the majors? So, but at the same time, if he does, you're talking number one starter for sure.
I have him at 8. I don't, but there are a lot of pitchers I'd say outside of my top 10 that I like better. I just think it's hard to ignore, as you said, the incredible fastball and incredible slider for that matter. I see his 3 best pitches right now are fastball, slider, cutter. And it's just hard, and hard, right? And there's nothing to really keep you off of, looking for a 90 plus mile an hour pitch. And the control is, we won't even talk about command. The control is just not there. So, if I'm Milwaukee, I get trying to figure out whether he can start, but the reality is I'm dealing Devin Williams because they're dealing Burns. They dealt Burns. They're dealing Adamas. I'm dealing Devin Williams, and I'm making Mizorowski my closer, right? Because I think you can get a lot for Devin Williams right now. But we'll see what happens. Again, he's my number 8. He's probably the one ranking I felt most uncomfortable with uh, because of that total lack of control. Who's your 6?
So who's your 5?
5 is Cade Horton.
Okay, and 6 is Cade Horton.
Okay, so
He's my high floor guy.
Horton for me is kind of the, in some ways the antithesis of Mizorowski, not totally because he's got a really great, what I give a 70 grade slider. But a guy who I think is, he's solidly built. He's pitched really, he was an athlete at Oklahoma, showed up in the College World Series, had tweaked a little bit and dominated. That's what made him go top 10 in the draft. People were surprised. But I think he's kind of just a prototypical, number 2, number 3 starter who's going to be good, who may not have greatness in him, but is worth the investment, right? In fantasy, he's a meat and potatoes dude. He's going to give you 180 innings, right? Maybe 200 innings. He's going to give you probably a strikeout per inning. I could see his ERA kind of settling in low to mid 3s, a whip at, between 1.1 and 1.2. He's got a good fastball. He's got good command with the fastball. He's got a wipeout slider. He's got some semblance of a curveball and a changeup, and he's got pretty good command at this point. So again, I don't see the upside that some do with him, but I think from a fantasy standpoint, he's a pitcher worth investing in, especially if you can couple investing in Cade Horton with, say, a much higher ceiling type of guy. Maybe it's Horton and one of the top 4 you talked about, or Horton and Tiedemann as an example, where that one of them is going to give you production for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have him at 6. He's not one of those, like, if you are rebuilding a dynasty or in our keeper league, he's one that I would roster because he is going to bring that stability to your staff. If you are win now, he's not necessarily someone you would want unless he comes up, but at the same time you don't want to keep him for that reason. So yeah, he's, to me, I think he's kind of like a to the Cubs is what he will be to the Cubs what Logan Gilbert is to
I knew
the
that was
Mariners.
coming. Mm-hmm.
He's just shorter, right? He's 6'1", 211, but that consistent guy, or even like kind of like what Jordan Montgomery was to Texas in the playoffs, right? Or at the end there. He's just that stable, dependable pitcher, repeatable delivery, consistent all the way around. I put him in basically dead in the middle here because he is my high floor player out of all these players, so yeah, and it's not like he's this 92 mph middling rotation guy. He's 94 to 98, good command, good repertoire of pitches. So yeah, I like him a lot. And you think when do you think he'll be up this year?
He'll be up this year for sure. If he dominates in spring training, would not surprise me one bit to see him start the year in the rotation. But certainly by the All-Star break, if everything goes well, that's when I would expect to see him. It is interesting. He didn't throw, I think, as much in college as a lot of other pitchers did, and so he's got a bit of a younger arm. And so, how they treat his number of pitches and his workload, I don't really know what the Cubs are going to do, but I expect to see him, especially if they're in contention, right? Their rotation is not great. They're going to need him at some point in time. But yeah, I think he's a horse, right? He's a guy who, I think you put it really well. If you're contending, you might be dealing Cade Horton for the piece that you need. And then you watch Cade Horton be a pretty good starting pitcher for the next 10 years. But if you're rebuilding, he's a great piece to have, right? In a dynasty, Cade Horton is a really great piece to have. You look at the rotation, it's Steele, Tyone, Imanaga, Hendricks, and Jordan Wicks. I'd say 4 of those 5 guys have question marks, right? Everybody but Steele, you can ask some real questions as to whether those guys are legitimate, are going to make it through the year and are going to be good. And then you've got Hayden Wesneski, Ben Brown, Caleb Killian, your favorite. And then in double A, it's Horton, and you continue to look down. I think in the beginning of the season, chances are he starts in double A. They give Wesneski a shot or Killian a shot if they need somebody in that 5th starter role outside of who's in the rotation. But by All-Star break, if Horton's pitching well, yeah, I expect to see him in the rotation. What are we at? 6?
Yep.
You got
Horton's my 6.
Oh, he is. At 6, I had Hurston Waldrop, first round pick of the Braves. He dropped down to the 20s in the draft. They signed him for a below slot deal. Everybody was pissed. Pitched at Florida. He is really different than Horton as well in his own way. I think I put him in almost in the Mizorowski bucket to a certain extent. His best pitch is a crazy split change that gets, if you watch video on this pitch, it's gnarly. It looks impossible to hit. It's a 70 grade on that pitch. He also goes fastball slider. Fastball slider split is a really funky combination, right? But the split makes you think of Gosman. Gosman has functioned with a fastball and a splitter. And a fastball that's probably velocity-wise is plus, but is maybe not a plus pitch. It might just be above average, right? But the split is so good that he's been able to function with those. And part of Gosman's stalling in development with the Orioles was that they tried to get him to throw other pitches, right? Curveball, slider, and he just didn't have them. Waldrop has a very good slider. It's a gyro slider, and he throws everything hard, but it's a good pitch. I really like him a lot. I roster him in our home league. I think he is statistically, you're looking at a Kyle Harrison type, right? Where I don't know if he's going to go 200 innings or even 190. He might be 150, 160 innings with a ton of strikeouts, but a slightly higher whip as well. He is one worth investing in. I think the Atlanta organization as a whole, hitting and pitching, is on fire right now. He went a little bit against their tendencies in that they pick, projectable, athletic, clean delivery types of pitchers, and he's everything but that, right? He's a really ugly windup. You could see him getting hurt. But for me, there's a lot of strikeout potential there. And if you trust the Braves, which I think most of us should, Waldrop is going to be good. And I have his ETA as 2024 as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nothing to add there. I like him a lot. I have him as 9. And I labeled him as a Gausman with a better fastball, a better split, and on a better team.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he could be better than Gausman with that split, and better overall, I think, is when we talk about his ceiling. So he's one of these high ceiling players that I think, frankly, could be in the top 20, top 10 starting pitchers in the future.
Right. So to add on the Gausman comp, I think what's interesting about Gausman for me is, people give him, I think he's overrated in a lot of circles, and his whip and the hits surrendered are high enough that there's an element of, if he can get to that split, he's great, but the other pitches are middling and hittable. And with the difference between him and Waldrop is, I think Gausman has better command and control, and probably will always, but Waldrop is more difficult to hit because the fastball shape and the slider are better pitches than the fastball slider from Gausman. But interesting comp for sure. So
Harrison was my 7.
who is?
Harrison was my 7.
Got it. 7 for me is Noah Schultz, left-handed starting pitching prospect for the Chicago White Sox. Do I trust the White Sox? Absolutely not. Do I trust a 6'9" left-handed high school pitcher drafted in the first round who's been hurt and hasn't thrown that many innings? I shouldn't. But the fastball slider combo is absolutely disgusting. And he throws it from a low 3/4 arm slot. It is really hard not to comp him to Randy Johnson when you see him pitch and you see the arm slot. I think more of Chris Sale. I think with Schultz, he also has a changeup that you could see developing, but that slider is like I said, it's disgusting. I've got a 60 on the fastball and a 65 on the slider. A lot of that is just, I don't know if the command is going to come necessarily. Command is a little better than you expect from a 6'9" guy, but he's 20 years old. He's kind of a wait and see. I have him here because of projection, but Noah Schultz could conceivably be the number one starting pitching prospect by the end of 2024 if he threw 100 innings, because you could see him go 100 innings with 140 strikeouts, right? And make it all the way to Double-A this season. That said, it is the White Sox, so I'm not holding my breath, but I really love Schultz. I have him above Mizorowski, and I notice I have not mentioned Ricky Tiedemann yet either. Is Schultz on your list?
Okay. No, he's not. He's just outside my list. I have him listed here at around 13, 12, 13.
Mm-hmm.
High upside. I wouldn't argue with anything you say there. As far as upside, again, this is the type of pitcher you want to look for. Again, for the rebuilders, even in our keeper league, he'd be someone to draft and hold.
Totally.
As far as somebody next year that will be that could be that elite on the top of the list of SPs.
Totally. If you're a bottom feeder in a 16 team league with 5 minor league spots and 15 keepers like our league is, why isn't Schultz being drafted or even being kept, right? Like it's the kind of pitcher that you can build an elite rotation if he hits. I don't know. I love him. I watched some video on him this last week and was pretty floored by how that stuff looked. The hitters just looked like they just gave up. They're like, this dude is way too nasty. I don't have any chance. If he happens to throw 3 strikes, I'm toast, right? Nasty stuff. Do you have someone different at 8?
At 8, yes, I have Snelling with the Padres at 8. One of the reasons why is just balance on my sheet and disappointment compared to old school baseball. So I put zeros with people that don't have the grades of their pitches listed. So the curveball, 0, 50, 55, 0, 60, 50, 0, 65, 0, 0, 0. So we don't see the curve that much. I love the Bugs Bunny curve. And Snelling has that, right? And with quite a bit of success as well. So he's a lefty, been quite successful at his age in the minors so far, probably had the best numbers overall. His K minus walk is not elite. His K percentage is between 25 and 30. There have been small control hiccups, but that's expected of a young guy. He has quite a repertoire of pitches. His fastball, is in the mid 90s, and that works very well with the curve. He's developing a change as well, and his fastball is not a straight fastball. So his fastball, if you watch him, has tons of ride on it. So he's one of those that you look at his counting stats, which are incredible. And then you look under the hood and then you understand why. It's not just luck there. So again, this is another young Padre pitcher, someone coming from the left side that that makes you kind of cheer for San Diego in light of what the Dodgers are doing. San
Right.
Diego's kind of bringing up all these pitchers, and it is interesting that they're continuing to develop their minor system, even though it got raided by the Nationals. And I just want them to continue to hold on and to do something different than the Dodgers, and as far as bringing up these young players that they've done well to identify. And they've never had a problem of identifying players since the GM's been there. But it's just, are they going to hold on to them and develop them and see them through?
Right. So he's outside of my top 10, very close. Uh, I'm a sucker for the athlete who is now starting to focus on one sport, right? Or the two-way player that's just focusing on doing one thing. Because I think there's so much more development to be had because of where that player is starting. And Snelling is very much in that camp, right? Football player, highly recruited. Um, I really like him a lot. I do have Tiedemann in my top 10. I think if I was to choose between one of those two lefties right now, I would probably take Snelling. When I do my own ranks, I do take into account what others say. I do think about, the amount of hype with certain players, and it's hard to ignore the hype on Tiedemann. It's hard to ignore the pure stuff. But if I'm the bet on who's the better player, better pitcher for me over the course of, say, 10 years, I think Snelling's probably the one. And if I had the stones to do it, I probably should have ranked him higher. But I love him. I think you're right. Uh, Again, I worry a little about the fastball, curveball, changeup combination, and I'd like to see him incorporate, a cutter or a slider into his repertoire, if just for show with something else hard. But Snelling's great. Snelling is. I don't know that his upside is that of an ace. I think his upside is probably that of a 2, because the pure stuff isn't quite there. But you want to talk about like a left-handed Cade Horton type of stat line. I think there's a lot of similarities in that way. He was 8 for you, is that right?
Yes, and Waldrop was 9.
Got it. So I had Schultz at 7, Mizorowski at 8, which brings me to the aforementioned Ricky Tiedemann at 9. So Tiedemann rated number 29 overall by Pipeline, 26 by BP. For those of you who have listened to this podcast from the beginning, he was a pitcher that I was super high on. I don't know, early last season, I think, when, before Tiedemann was really a name. Watched a lot of him. He's fun to watch, right? He's a big dude, 6'4", 220, but like kind of almost barrel chested. And so it just looks like a wrestler, like a WWE wrestler out there on the mound. Kind of a caricature almost. 4-seam fastball, high 90s, 2-seam fastball, incredible slider, sweeper type pitch, and a really good changeup, right? When you're comparing him to Harrison, Tiedemann has the better changeup, and he has the better command, and he's got the higher velocity fastball. The thing that separates Harrison for me is the shape of the fastball is just different, and it comes from such a different angle. But Tiedemann I think belongs in the top 10. The problem with him is he's been hurt, and he hasn't thrown. He threw 78 and 2/3 innings in 22. He threw 44 innings last season. I think had he not gotten hurt, we might have even seen him in Toronto at the end of the year. But a guy who you're worried about getting hurt, who hasn't thrown a ton of innings, just makes me nervous. And I don't love the Toronto development system either, specifically with pitching, right? You look at what happened with Nate Pearson or Yosver Zulueta or some of the other guys that are supposed to be higher end starting pitching prospects with Toronto, and they just haven't developed. So again, I think Tiedemann is worth being in the top 10. I think the stuff is pretty disgusting. If he is a probably 28% strikeout type of pitcher, and he's got pretty decent command. I just question the health and I question the org.
Mhm.
Where is Tiedemann for you?
I've Tiedemann at 10.
Mhm.
I just wanted to put him just at the end of this list. And I think we had him at the end of the list last year as well, our list last year.
You did, I didn't.
We didn't?
Mhm.
Okay.
We'll go over
But
those lists in a minute, but
no,
yeah.
but wasn't a controversy that people were wondering why we had him not number one?
Yep.
Um, so so to me, the biggest caution when he's one of those that did have the jump in velo,
Hmm.
and then after that jump in velo had injury issues.
Hmm.
He is not just the fastball for him, as you've said, is he has an elite slider. He hides the ball well, low arm angle. Um, what you want from a lefty that could just deceive players from both sides of the plate.
Hmm.
But to me, it's just, his innings just aren't there. And and he wasn't that elite prospect coming in. So you wonder if the change, the tweak has hurt his health. So that's my biggest concern. Unlike a player like a Painter or a Espino who has the good delivery, who were elite from the start, and then ran into what just about every pitcher runs into, especially with Painter with TJS. But Tiedemann, it's just the changes he made, I think has hurt his health. So I'm pretty much out on him. I think it's going to take quite a dice roll for him to be a consistent starter in on an MLB team.
I I agree. I think there's, and it's hard to quantify, right? It's hard to explain, but there's the addition of that muscle, and when you watch him pitch, there's something about it for me that's just not super comfortable. And I have to admit, he was my number one starting pitching prospect. But Skeens, there's an element of that, right? When you compare it to a pitcher who like Lesko. Lesko had TJ, but I look at Lesko's velocity, and it's really natural looking, right? The way that he pitches, there's a flow to it. There's even Job, who's a smaller pitcher. There's a fluidity to the way that he pitches that makes sense to me. And versus a Mizorowski or a Tiedemann, there's a reason why they're that low for me. Um, it's there are things about their delivery that just say to me, I don't know if the command is going to be there, but I also am worried that they're going to get hurt on their next pitch every single time.
Mm.
Um, so he's at 9. My number 10 is the opposite, and he's on this list for the reasons we just spoke of. Number 10 for me is Bubba Chandler, right-handed starting pitching prospect for the Pirates, 21 years old, rated 93 by Pipeline overall and not rated by BP in their top 21. But Bubba Chandler was I believe, a Clemson football commit, and was signed away by the Pirates. Just watch him pitch, man. Like, you want to talk about fluidity, and you want to talk about just an athlete, an absolute athlete on the mound that you can project to be like a number 2 starter type. It's a beautiful motion, right? I have 60 on the fastball, 60 on the slider, 50 on the curve and the changeup, and a 55 grade already on the command. And I think this is like your prototypical um, guy with athleticism who played baseball growing up, who's starting to kind of come into their own. I love Bubba Chandler as a starting pitching prospect. Um, if I had to choose between he and Mizorowski, I might take Chandler, right? If I had to choose between he and Horton, I'd take Horton because of proximity, but I almost like Chandler more. For me, he's right up there with a half a season of good pitching. He's up there with Lesko and Horton for me.
Mm.
One of my favorite pitching prospects in the minor leagues right now is Bubba Chandler.
Are you revealing your cards for the upcoming draft?
Not necessarily. I think there's a lot of guys who I'm going to try to recoup the guys who I'm going to cut first before I pick a Bubba Chandler. But yeah, I like him a lot for sure.
Right.
Who's your 10?
10 was Tiedemann, but I did
What's
have
he?
a 10B that I'm
Uh-huh.
going to put along with Schultz. This is going to come as a shock. It's a Hail Mary one.
Sure.
And his name actually came up last night when I was cleaning the kitty litter and being miserable listening to a pod to pitchers list. It's Nick Pollack or
Nick
Pollack?
Pollock. Hmm.
Pollock is how you say it.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, this name jumped out, and he finally articulated what I've always felt about this pitcher. I do roster him, so I am biased here. And I want him to get a chance as a freaking starter. So it's Prelander Baroa,
Ah,
27,
nice.
170.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, Chicago hasn't said anything. I'm wondering if they got him to move him back over to a starter. Because if you look at Schultz, slider, fastball, if
Hmm.
you look at Cease, slider, fastball, if there's a pattern there, maybe, in Chicago, even though everybody wants to puke when it comes to Chicago's system, their GM is somebody that has, that has always been there. Is he continuing that pattern? I hope they give him a chance because I think what he said last night on pitchers list was what comp he gave with slider fastball.
Hmm.
Everybody thought he was going to be a reliever. Spencer Strider.
Sure.
So you have an explosive fastball. If you see him coming out of a 5'11" guy, that fastball, if you just look at hitter's reaction, it's just nasty. Um,
Hmm.
and then his nastiest pitch. So I have him at 70 fastball, 70 slider. His nastiest pitch is a slider downward break, very late downward break, just nasty.
Hmm.
So this is a pitcher. This is again the big if with control. If he could control this stuff, it is elite of elite stuff.
Hmm.
I think he just didn't meet the Mariners' philosophy. They were loaded with pitchers. Um, I think they saw maybe that he isn't necessarily just a reliever. He may not be that elite closer that you liked, and they saw he had value there, and they went on and got the seventh, eighth inning guy that they could get out of
Santos.
Santos. So yeah, so I love him. I just hope the White Sox don't put him in relief. If they're smart, they're going to give him a chance to start. So he's somebody that I'm actually tweeting daily to see if we get any hints as far as what Chicago is doing with him
Yeah.
as they're reporting starting today.
I don't know why they would ask for him in a deal at the state of their franchise, why they would even want him in a deal if he was a reliever, right?
Yes, exactly.
I think you give him, what is he, 23 now? You probably give him another 2 years to see if he can develop into a starter. And if not, then he's an effective reliever and you trade him if you're not in contention. But you're right. He didn't fit the Mariners. It's interesting because it's hard to knock the Mariners pitching development right now at all, like at all.
Mm.
And yet they wouldn't sign Blake Snell. I don't think it's necessarily because of the money. I think it's because of the pitching philosophy, right? And the way that Snell approaches hitters, which is to never give in and walk them before you give them a pitch to hit. Or a Baroa who can't find the strike zone and they couldn't figure out how to tweak that, but has the elite stuff that he has. I wish they could figure out a place for all effective pitchers, regardless of approach. But yeah, that's a fun one. I had him at number 100 uh,
Mm.
in my initial top 100 last year before the season started because I thought he was so fun. I think he's a super fun pitcher. I love that you brought him up. Real quick in these last 5 minutes, do you have your one or your top 100 from last year pulled up for
No,
pitchers?
I don't.
I'll get started while you do that. I find it really interesting, and I think for my list at least, it's really indicative of pitching in that there's a couple of like, whoa, what were you thinking? But for
Mm.
the most part, I'm pretty proud of my list. I had Painter. My top four were Painter, Yuri Perez, Kyle Harrison, Grayson Rodriguez. And I think,
Mm.
obviously you couldn't predict Painter's injury. And I think that Perez is by far the best pitcher on this list. But if Painter was to stay healthy, I think he was competitive with him. Harrison, I knew was going to be a slower burn. I had him at 3. Grayson, I'm not a huge fan of. I think Grayson ultimately settles in as a 2 or a 3, and I'm happy with where I ranked him. At 5, I have Taj Bradley. I think Taj Bradley had some hiccups last year, but I still believe in his talent. 6 was my biggest screw up. 6 was Ken Waldichuk, left-handed starting pitcher for Oakland. I just felt like going to Oakland, that big park. I loved his stuff. I do think he was hurt last season a bit, but he was a tire fire for me, fantasy-wise, the entire season. And then 7, 8, 9, 10 were Gavin Williams, Bryce Miller, Gavin Stone, Bobby Miller. And I would probably stand by those ranks, obviously, with the exception of Stone. I would stand by those ranks. I think Gavin Williams, I would take Gavin Williams over Bobby Miller. I know everybody trips over themselves trying to talk about how elite Bobby Miller is. I haven't seen it yet. We didn't see it in the minors. I think he's an elite stuff, middle of the rotation type of starter. People gave me a lot of shit for putting Bryce Miller over Bobby Miller. That's the one we were talking about. I had no Tiedemann, but Bryce Miller on that list. And Bryce Miller shoved. He came out and was dealing for the Mariners, and I expect him to do it this year too. I think Gavin Williams gives you more innings than Bryce does ultimately. And so I'm comfortable with him there. But I'm proud of this list. I look at this list and I say, you know what? There's not a lot to argue there, right? I think the Painter injury you couldn't see. The Waldichuk rank at 6 was bad. The Stones rank at 9 was bad. But the rest of those guys on that list are still remain elite prospects. And was super fun to look at that. What was your top 10?
Yeah, so I thought I did pretty well here as well. I was kind of late to the party with I think last year was just because of the development of my dynasty teams and my keeper teams. I was late to the party with how to analyze pitching. But yeah, so I had G-Rod 1, Perez 2, Williams 3, Taj 4. Taj is a big sleeper for me this year. Even before Eno's article last night or yesterday. But I guess Eno has always been on that hill, right? Harrison 5, Miller, Dodgers 6, Tiedemann 7. So I thought I had him at the end, but he's 7. And then here's your favorite, Fod at 8. But he's still a pretty boy among the pods going into the draft.
He pitched really well at the end of the season, for sure.
And then Bryce Miller at and then Stone, Brown, Espino, and Hence were towards the end of my list. And you know who my bro was last year?
Who's that?
Cole Reagans.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So I remember that conversation, and I basically was like totally dismissive of him and made fun of him immediately. And sure enough, he became a star, at least for half a season there. It is good, though. It is good to go back and look at your rankings from the previous year. I was looking just now for anything like egregiously terrible. I had Elijah Green at 6 in the outfield. Zach Veen at 9 remains to be seen. What's funny though, like I have Evan Carter.
Still believe in Veen. I think Veen's a total sleeper this year. I think
we'll see.
He's got Twitch.
He does. I have Evan Carter at 8 going into last year. But the interesting part that I found is that I have his risk as low. And it's funny because that kind of remains the same sort of thing where he's a low risk, kind of lower, I believe, lower ceiling type of player. But super fun. We'll come back next week if you're okay with it, and we'll go 11 through 20.
Yes.
I think that should also be very interesting. And then after that, we'll dig into, maybe we'll divide our top 100 into 4 different segments, something like that, so we can really dive a little deeper. But really interesting group. I think every position you kind of get to pick and choose your preference, or pick and choose, what you love about a particular type of player, and go from there. There are people who would have Tiedemann and Mizorowski and Waldrop in their top 5, right? And for us, or at least for me, that's a hard type of pitcher to trust. And so I tend to land more on the Lesko, Horton, Bubba Chandler sort of place. But super duper fun. Pitching is scary. And we'll see what next week has to offer.
Yeah, definitely.
Appreciate it, man.
All right.
All right.
Sounds good.
Good to
Enjoyed
see you,
it.
brother.